Imagine waking up to the person you love most, only to discover they've been hiding a secret so dark, so devastating, it could tear your entire world apart. Could you handle the truth? Could you still love them knowing what they've done? Today we dive into a true crime story that begins with the perfect marriage, a love that seemed unbreakable. But behind the smiles, there was a horrifying secret waiting to be revealed. You meet Marcus Johnson and Ebony Davis, a newlywed couple whose love seemed straight out of a romance novel. On the outside, their life appeared flawless, the kind of perfect union that made others believe in love at first sight. A couple destined for happiness, their future together seemed like it was written in the stars. Marcus, a 32-year-old construction worker from Houston, Texas, was the kind of man who believed in tradition, in hard work, and in loyalty. Raised in a strict conservative household, he had been taught the importance of integrity, family, and being a provider. These values shaped his entire life. To his friends and family, Marcus was the embodiment of dependability, someone who would always show up when needed, no matter the cost. So with his muscular frame, strong hands, and rugged charm, Marcus had earned the respect of everyone around him. He wasn't the type to ask for help. Rather, he was the one who offered it. Whether it was working long hours on a construction site, helping his neighbors repair their homes, or providing for his family, Marcus took pride in his ability to protect and provide. He believed that a man's worth was defined by his actions, not his words. Raised in a community where hard work and resilience were prized above all else, Marcus had always seen himself as someone who would one day settle down with a woman who shared his values. He wanted to build a life based on mutual respect, love, and tradition, a life where his future children could grow up knowing the security of a stable home. He was a man who valued family above everything else, and his family, in turn, valued him. For Marcus was their rock, the one they relied on. And then there was Ebony. At 28, Ebony Davis was everything Marcus had ever dreamed of. Beautiful, confident, with an undeniable presence, she exuded a kind of energy that made people gravitate to Beethoven's. Her glowing brown complexion and captivating dark eyes made her stand out in any crowd, but it was her warmth and charisma that truly set her apart. Ebony was a hairstylist by profession, building a reputation as one of the best in Houston's vibrant beauty scene. But her talent wasn't just in her hands, it was in her ability to connect with people. Whether she was styling a client's hair or chatting with a stranger, Ebony had a way of making everyone feel important, like they were the only person in the room. Her clients adored her, not just for her work, but for the way she made them feel valued and seen. She had a gift for making people feel beautiful, both inside and out. Her confidence was magnetic. Ebony had a way of commanding attention without ever trying to, and her smile had the kind of warmth that could light up a room. People were drawn to her effortlessly. It didn't take long for Marcus to fall under her spell, and once he did, there was no turning back. Marcus and Ebony met at a local church event, a community gathering that brought together people from all walks of life. From the moment Marcus laid eyes on Ebony, he felt something stir deep within him. He'd always believed in love, he was raised to do so, but this was different. This wasn't the kind of love he had read about in books or seen in movies. This was the kind of love that felt like fate, like destiny had led him straight to her. When their eyes met across the room, something in Marcus told him that this was the woman he had been waiting for. Ebony, too, felt the instant connection. She had always been careful with her heart, guarded by the lessons of her past, but something about Marcus, his sincerity, his protective nature, made her want to let her guard down. In him she saw a partner, someone who could build a future with her, someone who would stand by her side no matter what. The chemistry between them was undeniable. Their connection grew quickly, and soon they were inseparable. Friends and family were taken aback at how fast their relationship developed, but no one could deny the spark between them. It was the kind of whirlwind romance that left everyone around them in awe. Within a few months of their first meeting, Marcus was already talking about a future with Ebony. He'd never been so sure about anything in his life. Marcus' friends marveled at the speed with which things were moving, but they couldn't deny the fact that he seemed happier than they'd ever seen him. His smile was broader, his laughter more frequent, and his eyes, well, they seemed to sparkle in a way they never had before. Ebony had become his world, and she fit into his life so seamlessly that it was as though she had always been there. A year after they met, Marcus proposed to Ebony. He had already made up his mind that she was the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. The proposal was everything he had dreamed of: romantic, heartfelt, and perfect. Ebony said yes without hesitation, tears welling up in her eyes as she realized that her own dreams were coming true. To the outside world, Marcus and Ebony were the perfect couple. They were young, beautiful, and seemingly in love with each other in a way that others admired. Their engagement was celebrated with joy, and their friends and family eagerly anticipated their wedding day. The wedding, held at the historic Houston Baptist Church, was nothing short of spectacular. Over 200 guests gathered to witness the union of Marcus and Ebony, two people who had come together against the odds and were now embarking on the journey of a lifetime. The ceremony was flawless. Marcus stood at the altar, waiting for Ebony to walk down the aisle, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't help but think how incredibly lucky he was. Ebony looked like a goddess in her shimmering white gown, a vision of beauty that took his breath away. As she walked toward him, he could hardly believe that this woman, this radiant, confident woman, was about to be his wife. For Marcus, this was the culmination of everything he had worked for, everything he had dreamed of. He had found the woman he would spend the rest of his life with, and nothing could tear them apart. But even on their wedding day, there were subtle hints that something was not quite right. As Marcus stood at the altar, watching Ebony approach, he noticed the smallest flicker of hesitation in her eyes, something fleeting, something he quickly dismissed as wedding day nerves. Her hands trembled ever so slightly as she held onto his, and for a brief moment, Marcus wondered if perhaps the weight of the day was simply getting to her. After all, it was a big moment for both of them. Still, he brushed it off. Their wedding was a dream come true, and in that moment, he believed that they had everything they needed to make their marriage work. What Marcus didn't know was that this seemingly perfect day would be the beginning of a journey into the unknown, a journey that would take them to a place no one could have anticipated. In the days that followed, the newlyweds embarked on a luxurious honeymoon in the Caribbean, a place of sun, sand, and endless romance. Yet, despite the beauty of their surroundings, something felt off. Marcus, ever the protector, couldn't shake the feeling that Ebony was holding something back. Despite the idyllic setting, there were moments when she seemed distant, lost in thought, her mind far away from the paradise around her. Even as they basked in the sun, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if their picture-perfect relationship was truly as flawless as it appeared. Ebony, the woman he had come to know and love, was changing before his eyes, and as much as he tried to convince himself that everything was fine, a nagging sense of unease began to settle in the pit of his stomach. Something wasn't right, and deep down he knew it. But what he couldn't have known, what he could never have imagined, was that the truth, when it finally came to light, would shatter their lives in ways they could never have anticipated. As Marcus and Ebony settled into their married life, things began to take a subtle shift. The honeymoon bliss eventually faded, and reality began to set in. At first it was the smallest things, a moment of silence, a distant look in Ebony's eyes, but these little shifts began to weigh on Marcus's mind. Ebony would sometimes seem lost in thought, her eyes clouded with an unspoken concern, a sorrow he couldn't reach. When he asked if anything was wrong, she would brush it off with a proof smile or a change of subject, but something was off. So Marcus, ever the optimist, tried to chalk it up to wedding day nerves, or perhaps the post-honeymoon blues. After all, their life together had been a whirlwind, and it was only natural for some moments of doubt to creep in. But as the days went on, the unease seemed to grow. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking beneath the surface, something Ebony wasn't telling him. On one of those ordinary evenings, while Ebony was out running errands, Marcus found himself alone in their shared apartment. The soft hum of the city outside was a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside him. As he sat down at the kitchen table, his gaze fell on Ebony's phone, which he had left charging on the counter. For a brief moment, Marcus hesitated, but curiosity gnawed at him. He reached for the phone, telling himself it was harmless to check, just a quick glance. He had nothing to hide from Ebony. Why should she be any different? But what he found was far from harmless. As he unlocked the phone, Marcus was met with a series of medical documents, personal files, and text conversations, things he never expected to find. His fingers trembled as he scrolled through the documents, his heart beginning to race. And then it hit him, a medical record from a doctor's office, detailing a transition, a procedure that outlined the transformation Ebony had undergone years before they met. Ebony had transitioned from male to female. The woman Marcus had married, the woman he had come to love, had been born a man. A wave of disbelief hit him like a tidal wave, each new piece of information crashing over him harder than the last. His mind raced. How could this be? How could Ebony hide something so monumental from him? His thoughts were a chaotic storm. He couldn't understand it. They had talked about everything during their courtship, their dreams, their fears, their pasts. Ebony had shared so much with him, but this was something he never saw coming. The woman he had married wasn't the woman he thought she was. His love for her, everything he believed to be true, now felt like a lie. How could she have kept this from him? Why would she hide such a heightsam part of her identity? It was as if the foundation of their entire relationship had been built on a secret, one that had been kept for so long, buried deep beneath layers of charm and beauty. What else had she kept from him? Was there more he didn't know? The questions flooded in, each one more painful than the last. Marcus couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. His head was spinning, his heart pounding in his chest. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. How had she fooled him for so long? It was impossible to reconcile the woman he had married with the truth he had just uncovered. He needed answers, and he needed them now. When Ebony finally returned home, the atmosphere between them was charged with tension. Marcus couldn't look at her without feeling a deep sense of hurt and confusion. He waited, silent, his mind racing with every possible scenario, until he could hold it in no longer. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "Why did you hide this from me, Ebony? Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me the truth?" His words cut through the air, the hurt and betrayal evident in his voice. Ebony stood frozen in the doorway, her face pale, her hands trembling. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked at Marcus, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and fear, the weight of the secret. The wish that she had cries that were exposed, and there was nowhere to wear. I didn't know how," Ebony whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't know how to tell you. I was afraid you wouldn't love me anymore. I thought if I told you, you'd leave." He tried to take a step toward him, but Marcus backed away, his anger rising. "How could you think I wouldn't love you?" Marcus shouted. "How could you think I'd leave you because of something you can't control? You've been lying to me, Ebony, and I can't deal with this." His voice cracked with frustration as he turned away, pacing across the room. Ebony's face crumpled as the tears began to fall. She fell to her knees, pleading with him, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to be loved. I just wanted to be normal. I didn't want you to look at me differently." Marcus's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Part of him wanted to understand, to forgive her, but the anger was too great. How could he reconcile the woman he had married with the woman who had kept such a massive secret from him? His trust had been shattered, and the pain of betrayal was like a knife in his chest. "You should have told me," Marcus said, his voice low and heavy with emotion. "You should have been honest with me from the start. We could have worked through this together, but you kept it from me. And now I don't know what to think." Ebony cried silently, her body shaking with the weight of the moment. She had never wanted to hurt Marcus. She had never wanted him to feel betrayed. But now there was no way to undo the damage. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Marcus was no longer the man she had married. He was someone different now, a man broken by a secret, a man who no longer trusted her. The argument escalated from words to shouting, the tension between them growing thicker, heavier with each passing moment. So Marcus was torn between the desire to forgive her and the overwhelming sense of betrayal. His mind raced, each thought pulling him in a different direction. What was he supposed to do now? How could he go forward with someone who had lied about something so fundamental? In that moment, the anger built inside Marcus until it was unbearable. His fists clenched, his body trembling with rage. Ebony, sensing the shift in him, stepped back, her own fear rising. She knew, deep down, that this could all end in disaster. She had hoped, prayed, that Marcus would understand, that he would forgive her, but now As the tension between them grew unbearable, she feared that she had lost him for good. What happened next was a moment of madness, a brutal escalation that neither of them could have predicted. In that flash of rage, the man who had promised to protect her became someone unrecognizable. The anger inside him was so deep, so intense, that it erupted with a violence that would change both of their lives forever. That fateful night, the atmosphere in the apartment was charged with a kind of tension that no one could have anticipated. What had started as a marriage filled with love, trust, and promise had devolved into a terrifying confrontation. The shocking truth about Ebony's past, once hidden so carefully beneath layers of charm and smiles, had shattered the fragile peace they had built together. Marcus's mind was a storm of confusion, anger, and betrayal. He had loved this woman, built a life with her, and now everything he knew about their relationship had crumbled in an instant. The woman who had stood by his side, the woman he had promised to protect, had deceived him in a way that seemed the Givervine of Obla. How could he move forward from here? How could he continue to love someone who had hidden such a monumental truth? He couldn't think straight. His mind raced as he replayed the confrontation in his head over and over again. Ebony's tear-filled eyes, her desperate pleas for forgiveness, her cries of sorrow. The more he tried to make sense of it, the angrier he became. The anger, deep and primal, surged within him like a tidal wave. It had clouded his judgment, overtaking every rational thought he had. He couldn't let it go. As the minutes ticked by, the air grew thicker with tension. Ebony, sensing the shift in his demeanor, grew more frightened, but she couldn't undo the damage. She had tried to explain, to plead for forgiveness, but Marcus was beyond reason. His rage was too strong, too consuming. The man who once promised to protect her was now standing before her like a stranger, a man driven by something darker than love, something more dangerous. "Please, Marcus, please," Ebony begged, her voice trembling with panic. "I love you. I didn't want to hurt you. I never meant to hurt you. Please understand." But her words fell on deaf ears. Marcus couldn't hear her anymore. All he could feel was the fire of betrayal burning inside him. In a split second, the argument escalated, and what had once been words of hurt and confusion quickly turned into something much darker. Marcus's anger boiled over, and in that instant, he lashed out. His mind clouded with rage, he grabbed Ebony by the shoulders, shaking her violently, demanding to know why she had lied to him. But the more he shook her, the more distant and frightened she became. She tried to pull away, to break free, but his grip was too strong. Ebony's heart raced as she realized just how far the situation had spiraled out of control. She had never seen Marcus like this before. She had never seen him so consumed by fury. Desperation flooded her veins as she struggled, but there was no escaping the violence of the moment. Her cries for help echoed through the apartment, but they were swallowed by Marcus's rage, a force that had overtaken him completely. In a blind, uncontrollable fit of rage, Marcus shoved Ebony hard against the wall. The force of the impact left her stunned, but she tried to push herself back to her feet, her breath ragged, her eyes filled with fear and disbelief. She had always known Marcus as her protector, the man who would stand by her side through thick and thin. But now, in this moment, he was the one who was threatening her life. At that moment, Marcus snapped. In a flash of violent emotion, he reached for anything in his path. His hand found the lamp on the side table, and without thinking, he swung it violently at Ebony, striking her with brutal force. The blow landed with a sickening thud, and Ebony crumpled to the floor, her body collapsing in an unnatural way. Ebony's body went limp, and her blood stained the carpet beneath her. Marcus stood over her, breathing heavily, his mind still in a fog of rage. He didn't understand what he had just done. He couldn't comprehend it. In that moment, he couldn't grasp the reality of the situation. He had just killed the woman he loved. The weight of the act did not settle in right away. Marcus's breath came in sharp gasps as he stared down at Ebony, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was silent, save for the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. For a moment it was as if the world had stopped moving. But slowly, the gravity of the situation began to sink in. His mind began to clear, and the realization hit him like a freight train. Ebony, the woman who had been his wife just hours ago, was lying dead on the floor. His hands trembled as he dropped to his knees beside her, his breath shaky as he reached out to touch her cold skin. The love he had felt for her was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of horror and regret. But it was too late. It was over. As the minutes stretched on, Marcus remained frozen beside Ebony's lifeless body. But the silence didn't last long. The sound of sirens grew louder, closer, and the reality of what he had done became all too real. Where someone had heard the commotion, someone had called the police, and now Marcus would face the consequences of his actions. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. Friends, family, and neighbors were in shock. How could this happen? How could a marriage that seemed so perfect, so full of love, end in such a horrific way? Marcus, the man who had always been a protector, the man who had promised to cherish his wife, had killed her in a fit of rage. The brutality of the murder sent shockwaves through Houston, a city where such a tragedy seemed unimaginable. The community was left to grapple with the reality of what had just occurred. Marcus was arrested, taken into custody without a struggle. His eyes were hollow, his face devoid of emotion, as if the man who had killed Ebony was no longer the man they had all known. Ebony's death was a tragedy, but it was also a revelation. The perfect life, the perfect marriage, had been nothing more than an illusion, shattered in a moment of violent madness. No one could have predicted how things would end for Marcus and Ebony. What had started as a love story had now become a haunting reminder of the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences of keeping secrets. Marcus Johnson's world, once built on love and promises, had come crashing down in an instant. After the murder of his wife, Ebony Davis, the legal system would now decide his fate. He was arrested on charges of first-degree murder. A once promising future, a once cherished love, now lay in ruins. The trial that followed was an emotional roller coaster. For weeks, the courtroom became a battleground of emotions where justice would be served, but at what cost? The prosecution painted a grim picture of a man blinded by betrayal, driven to murder by the truth his wife had concealed for years. Meanwhile, the defense argued that Marcus's actions, though horrific, had been a tragic result of the deep emotional distress he had suffered upon discovering Ebony's secret. The prosecution's case was clear-cut. They described the murder as a senseless act of rage. They presented evidence of the argument between Marcus and Ebony, including a series of texts and phone calls made in the hours leading up to the fatal confrontation. They showed how Marcus's emotions had spiraled out of control, fueled by anger, betrayal, and confusion over Ebony's hidden past. They argued that no matter how shocking the revelation, no matter how devastating the truth about Ebony's past might have been, there was no justification for taking her life. The law, they insisted, was clear. Marcus had killed Ebony, and he would have to pay the price. The defense, on the other hand, sought to humanize Marcus. They emphasized the emotional toll that the discovery had taken on him. They spoke of Marcus's character, how he was known for his integrity, his love for his family, and his deep devotion to Ebony. The defense argued that the murder was not premeditated, but rather the result of a tragic emotional breakdown. In their eyes, Marcus was a man who had been pushed to the edge by a truth he never could have imagined. Throughout the trial, Marcus's family and friends were torn. They spoke of how he had always been a loving, caring individual. His mother tearfully described how Marcus had always been there for her, how he had been the kind of son who took care of his family, who believed in traditional values, and who had a strong sense of right and wrong. His friends, too, painted a picture of a man who had never shown any sign of violence, a man who had always been calm, collected, and protective. They described Marcus's shock when he first found the medical records revealing Ebony's past. They spoke of his disbelief, his confusion, and his feelings of deep betrayal. It was clear that the weight of this revelation had shattered something inside him. But even as they expressed sympathy for Marcus's emotional turmoil, they also struggled with the undeniable truth. Ebony was dead, and Marcus had taken her life. Marcus sat in silence, his face a mask of regret and sorrow. It was clear that he was haunted by what he had done, but at the same time, he could not escape the gravity of his actions. He had loved Ebony, but his rage had overridden everything: their marriage, their future, their shared dreams. Now those dreams were forever gone. The victim's family, too, took the stand, their pain evident as they spoke about the woman they had lost. Ebony's mother and father described their daughter as a beautiful, kind-hearted woman who had always been full of life. They spoke of her warmth, her smile, and her generosity. They spoke of how proud they were of her, how she had overcome so much in her life, including transitioning from male to female, and how she had finally found happiness with Marcus. But now, that happiness had been torn away, and they were left to mourn the loss of a daughter, a sister, and a friend. It became evident that there were no true winners in this case. There was no joy in the proceedings, no sense of satisfaction or closure, just pain, heartache, and a sense of utter destruction. For Marcus, the emotional weight of his actions hung over him like a dark cloud. For Ebony's family, the loss of their daughter would never be healed. In the end, Marcus was found guilty of first-degree murder. The jury deliberated for hours, weighing the circumstances of the crime, Marcus's emotional state, and the severity of the loss. They ultimately determined that despite the shocking nature of the revelation, there could be no justification for the taking of Ebony's life. Marcus was sentenced to life in prison, a life that would forever be marked by the vastly brutal act of violence he had committed. His future was now a dark and uncertain one, shaped by the consequences of that one moment of rage. For Marcus, the journey ahead would be one of reckoning and reflection. There was no undoing the past. There was no bringing Ebony back. The life he had once known, filled with promise and love, had been destroyed in an instant. The death of Ebony Davis left a hole in the lives of all who knew her. A life full of potential, love, and dreams was tragically cut short. But for Marcus, the true punishment would be living with the knowledge that his rage had led him to destroy the very thing he once cherished most, the woman he loved. This is the haunting reminder that secrets, when hidden for too long, can lead to irreversible consequences. And sometimes, the truth can be far more devastating than we ever imagined. The case of Marcus and Ebony Johnson is a tragic reminder of how secrets, no matter how well hidden, can destroy lives. What started as a fairy tale romance ended in heartbreak, loss, and devastation. Could Marcus have ever forgiven Ebony for keeping such a secret? Could their love have survived the truth? We'll never know. But this tragic story teaches us that the truth, while powerful, can sometimes be more dangerous than we ever imagined. Could Marcus have lived with the reality of Ebony's past, or would the weight of her hidden truth always have haunted him? The emotional toll of that revelation, and the way it shattered his perception of their life together, created an irreversible rift. As much as Marcus tried to reconcile his love for Ebony with the betrayal he felt, the foundation of their marriage was never strong enough to withstand such a devastating shock. Many ask whether Marcus, a man known for his kindness and devotion, could ever have been pushed to such extremes. But that's the dark truth. Even the most loving, well-intentioned people have breaking points. When trust is shattered, when a secret as profound as this is revealed, it can unravel everything that once seemed perfect. In the end, it wasn't just the murder of Ebony that was so tragic, it was the loss of a future, the destruction of two lives, and the irreversible consequences of betrayal. Marcus was left with a lifetime of guilt, unable to undo what he had done. Ebony's family was left to mourn their daughter, sister, and friend, forever wondering if things could have turned out differently. The case of Marcus and Ebony Johnson is not just a story of murder, but a cautionary tale of the dangers of keeping secrets, of living in the shadows of your past. It's a reminder that sometimes the truth can be more devastating than any lie. The events that unfolded in Houston were a devastating culmination of emotions: anger, betrayal, grief, and a desperate desire for answers. Yet in the end, the only answer left was the one no one wanted: a tragic, irreversible act that would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. Could Marcus have ever come to terms with the truth? Could he have forgiven Ebony, or would their relationship have been destroyed by the weight of the secret? The questions linger, unanswered, just like the broken pieces of a love that could never be mended. What we do know is this: no matter how much love we give, no matter how much we trust, there are moments in life when the truth can be far more dangerous than we ever imagined. And sometimes, the choices we make in the heat of the moment can alter our lives forever. The story of Marcus and Ebony is a stark reminder that no one is exempt from the consequences of their actions. And no matter how perfect life may seem on the outside, beneath the surface, there can be shadows waiting to consume everything in their path. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more true crime stories and investigations.